Hey guys, I hope you all are doing well. This week has been a fairly interesting week, at least in the topics covered, and for this video I'm going to try to do a three-part video instead of the typical one cohesive thing, kind of breaking it up into little segments that make it a little easier to understand. So those parts are going to be funny topics in class, featuring anime class most of the time, because even if the other classes aren't very interesting, you always know that anime class is going to be interesting. And then the second part is milestones, so just cool things that happened, adult things that I've learned to do in my college existence, stuff like that. Also milestones for the channel, and finally Nat 1s and Nat 20s, which we'll get to when we get to it. So let's go ahead and first dive in to class topics of interest. So in my anime class, the theme this week for the very first day was Buddhism and some Buddhist beliefs as we started talking about the yokai, which are essentially these monster spirits which are part of the Shinto religion, but as you might imagine, have a lot of influence from the kind of Buddhist type of beliefs. And so we learned this week that in Buddhism, absolutely nothing is permanent. Doesn't matter what it is impermanent. But this raises a question, of course, which is, doesn't that mean that the whole eternal punishment thing that hell is supposed to be can't exist in Buddhism, since nothing is permanent? And to that, the Buddhists say, yeah, we kind of did write ourselves into a corner there. Well, I know what we'll do. We'll make it so that it is technically impermanent. It's just that it's very, very, very long. There are apparently some Buddhist beliefs that it's the amount of grains of sand in this one river is the amount of years that you spend in their hell. And there's all of these different beliefs that are essentially all made in order to create an extremely large, but not infinitely large, amount of years that you would have to spend in hell if you did murder or do anything that they would not believe to be morally correct. The other topic that came up in anime this week was that of the atomic bomb. And we've been talking about this for many weeks. Godzilla, of course, is literally an embodiment of the atomic bomb on the Japanese people. But this week, we specifically talked about one high school whose logo and mascot are actually of the atomic bomb. And it was funny to me that we were talking about this high school because I've actually been there. You see, my dad took me on all of these trips to see the nuclear facilities of the United States, since my family has history with the kind of atomic bomb testing. And so he thought it was very important for me to kind of see what it was. We've also been to atomic bomb sites in Japan to see what their perspective was, of course. And so this all came and ended with this point where they started showing all these pictures on screen and everyone's gasping and they're like, what? There's a school with a cloud from the atomic bomb as their logo? And I'm just like, oh yeah, knew that, been there, done that, yeah. And just a very odd feeling as everyone was just kind of in this disbelief. And I, because of the realities that I had seen, was kind of forced to be in belief. And their whole slogan, to be proud of the cloud, was obviously a bit of a controversial topic, and one that we did have a little bit of fun. I mean, I'm not sure if fun is the correct word, but it was certainly interesting to discuss in our discussion on Friday, where I learned that a lot of people actually weren't just straight up hating the cloud in that class, which is unusual for me. I'm used to classes all being united on the front that America is horrible and the atomic bomb was a terrible thing that we did. So it was kind of interesting to not have that like one-sided perspective for once in a discussion. Anyways, moving right along, in my English class, we had an example of one of those one-sided discussions that I've grown so used to. We were assigned an article to read for class that day. This sort of humorous article, at least it was to me, by a well-known comedian who apparently a few of the students had even watched when they were kids. But all of a sudden, when we got to this piece, something about gender roles, which essentially compared guys to men and distinguished them by saying that guys were essentially less bad than men, but also just kind of bring in all these like gender role type things, all very much joking, all very like extra and out there. But everyone was so zeroed in on the fact that this guy mentioned that women are the ones that move the furniture and men are the ones that go around and like buy tons of technological stuff and all of this. And so as everyone is kind of voicing their hatred, I find myself alone in admiring, or at least thinking, that the author articulated and executed humor effectively. I thought that the piece was funny. And yes, I am a girl, and yes, he did say that women were always like rearranging furniture, but that didn't offend me because I know that that's a stereotype, and it's just kind of a funny thing to like look at and be like, oh yeah, people think that that's what we can do. But this guy obviously didn't, for various reasons that were in his writing. It was embedded in his writing. He called, for example, he called God a she. So in this way, these things were kind of embedded into his writing and made it very clear that this stuff wasn't really meant to be taken seriously. And yet the entire class did take it seriously. Moving forward, we went into Wednesday, and on Wednesday we were given another piece to read. This time, the piece was from a point of view that was going against gender roles. It was by a woman who decided to talk about how women were a recent invention and how for the past hundreds of years men have been the only thing that's been around. To me, it read as a very antagonistic piece, a very like horrible, jagged piece. There were references to like Nazis, there was a joke about someone's suicide, all of this kind of stuff. And to me, I could not enjoy the piece because it was just constantly, to me at least, throwing these like arrows at me. And so when we got into class that day to discuss it, and everyone started voicing their like unabashed love of the piece, I couldn't be quiet anymore about like my beliefs, and so I actually straight up said to the class, I don't think that we believe the same thing, however, this is how it reads to me. And in that moment, it was kind of interesting, because at first I had felt isolated. But because of the way that my teacher received that statement, the way that he said, oh, that's interesting, I really like it when people disagree because then we can actually hear more sides. Because he said that, it went from being this kind of uncomfortable, gnawing feeling inside of me to being like, oh, yeah, I can see that different perspective that seems invisible to everyone else. And I know that superpower is probably the second most said word on this channel other than like and or something. It did feel kind of like that. Because whenever people get a superpower or whenever they have that sort of feeling, there's always this bit of like being ostracized that starts out with it. This bit of feeling like they aren't like who they should be, or that they're out of place, or that they're weird or whatever. But then eventually they learn that they can use this weirdness for good. And so I've learned this week that having a different opinion is essentially a superpower. And that my new definition of a superpower is pretty much anything that separates you from the crowd and makes a positive difference in the world. And you might ask, well then, how does static electricity make a difference in the world? I see how it distinguishes you. And to that I say, I shocked a lot of people with that. So it definitely made a difference in their perception of me and all of that. But it was definitely one of those moments where I had never been more thankful for a teacher to be so open to different perspectives, and I realized that they're always supposed to be open like that, but it was just a really good moment of actually being able to express myself. And then the classroom didn't even like turn against me. They actually kept agreeing with me and stuff, which was really refreshing. It was a really nice departure from what I had grown used to in high school, where I was kind of like the person whose ideas people tended not to agree with, to being someone who people would at least acknowledge the views of. Anyways, enough about that. Another thing that I had today this week, was a lab on magnetism on Wednesday. And in this lab, I in fact thought up again about that whole experience that I had with static electricity in high school, because I found myself in this lab being almost charged by all of the electric machines that were going off around me. And it always happens because my physics class is an electricity and magnetism class. And whenever I walk into that room, I'm like, am I just like more electrically conductive? Do I have a higher body capacitance than all of the other people in this room? Because whenever I walk in there, I can literally feel like this weird charge just running through me. And from what I can tell, no one else does. And it's kind of this bizarre thing that I really hope that I could study or have explained to me by someone, but it is kind of a weird phenomenon that I've been experiencing and wanted to bring up. Anyways, we're going to go ahead now and move on to milestones. So this week there were two main milestones. One for me as a human being and an adult, and one for me as a YouTube person. So we'll go ahead and start out with the adult one. This week I finally managed to get outside of the college campus without one of my parents' help. And this is a huge thing because I had previously been pretty much locking myself within the boundaries of campus, waiting for one of my parents to come over to the school and bring me to stores and stuff so that I could go there. I hadn't really tried anything like public transportation because everywhere that I wanted to go, I could either walk or get a ride from one of my peers to. And so this week, I finally did it. I finally rode public transport. And I think that story I will save for another day. But regardless, needless to say, it was a bit stressful. But in the end, we managed to go to the Goodwill, get the supplies that we needed, and get home without too much harm mentally and zero harm physically. So in the end, I think that was a success, if not a bit of a stressful moment, and I will now put another point in my adulting column to look back on in the future and to think, wow, she really did it. She really got on that streetcar and rode for like 10 minutes to get to the Goodwill. That's pretty darn impressive. Anyway, my other milestone is my milestone as a YouTuber. And for that milestone, it is that not only do we have 20 subscribers, which is awesome. It's great that there's 20 people out there that actually care about the stuff that I make. One day I hope to have more, but as for now, it's just great to have this tight-knit community where I literally don't really care too much about what I say, and I don't really feel stressed because I know all of you and you all know me, and you knew me in real life, so making mistakes isn't that big of a deal. But the real milestone I want to talk about is finishing Sorcery Part 1 and the video that came with it. Now you may notice that that video is my longest video on this channel, and for that I apologize. It was just one of those things where you kind of got into it and there wasn't really like a good stopping point, and I also felt the momentum going towards an ending. So I do apologize for the length, but if you do get through it, and I tell you you should, that is the very first video that I personally added special effects to. And they're not spectacular special effects. I'm not even sure if I can call them special effects. They're more like little things that I did in the video to either emphasize or just try to make a little joke at my own expense. But it does stand out to me as not only my first completed game, the Sorcery Part 1, but also my first real edited like effects video, which is super, super exciting to me. And I don't know how many more of those videos of that type I'm going to make because it takes such a long time, but I am certainly hoping to at least be able to add a little bit of creative flair to videos in the future. So that does it to milestones. Let's move on to the final segment, which I'm going to call Nat 1s and Nat 20s, but I will also include other values in. So the derivation of this segment comes from D&D, you know, the game I play way too much of. So in Dungeons & Dragons, you have a 20-sided die that essentially decides if you succeed or fail at any given task. A 20 being a guaranteed success, and a 1 being a guaranteed fail. Anything in between those is pretty much anything in between. Greater than 10 is typically a success, and less than 10 is typically a fail, though those successes and fails are less epic. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to give a few numbers to each of these events that I have had in my day-to-day life recently. Alright, starting off, I was walking through school, and there are tables for clubs and organizations everywhere, and the DM in my head says, roll for stealth. And so I go ahead and I take that mental die and I roll it, and I say, yes, I got a 16. And I succeed in getting past all of those tables and people without any of them asking me for a moment of my time, which was good as I was in a hurry to get to my next class. However, tonight, as I went to go get some dinner, I go ahead and I'm walking through and I see that the main meat for today that's on the chopping block is turkey. And I personally despise turkey. And so I'm walking and I'm like, oh man, I just talked to this one person and there's like no one here. I just really want to be able to go over and like look at this one area that's past the turkey and just get by there. But then that little voice in my head, the DM in my head went and said, roll for stealth again. And I thought, oh, this will be fine. I rolled pretty well last time. This should be okay. And so I go ahead and roll, and much to my shock and distress, it's a 1. And so I absolutely fail on my stealth check to avoid the turkey, and not only does the turkey person see me, but they shout over to me, hey, you want some turkey? In a way that each introvert knows forces you to go over and get turkey whether you want it or not. And so I was forced to get the turkey, which was not the best because I just... roast turkey is not my thing, and so I just had to take it on my plate and just accept the fate that I had been given by the dice of my mind. And so another thing that I constantly have to roll for is perception, to see things like lizards on the ground or birds in the tree or cats scurrying around. And this week, all of my perception rolls were over a 17, allowing me to not only acutely be aware of the tiny birds that were sitting in the trees and the lizards that were constantly scampering about my feet, but also not only a pure white cat that dashed through the sidewalk, but a pure black one that I saw as I was walking at night, mind you, to water polo. It takes a very high roll to be able to see these creatures, as they are not only very quiet, but also very fast. And so I was very proud that I was able to spot them with my high roll. Additionally, on that night, however, the dice can never, ever favor either the good or the bad. And so that night during practice, I had to roll an athletics check to see how well I would do in that practice. And much to my horror, I rolled a 1. And rolling a 1 for athletics in practice means not only will you have the absolute worst, longest swim set that you've ever had, but you will completely suck at that said swim set, and you will suck at literally everything that happens afterwards. That practice, I didn't make a single shot, and this includes some shots that were set up to be a pretty much guaranteed, in, and I still just couldn't make any of them, because I had rolled so poorly that I was just gonna do horrible no matter what. Finally, the 2 final rolls that I just want to kind of wrap us up with were for waking up. And so in D&D we have something called will saves. And it's just as you would think. It's essentially where you have to roll to see if your will is strong enough to overcome some unforeseen force. And so in this case, the unforeseen force was tiredness and laziness. And so on Friday, my alarm goes off at 7 a.m. and I have to roll a will save to get up despite all my tiredness, to roll out of bed and to get up and start my day. But I roll a 5, and much to my dismay, I go ahead and I roll right on back asleep despite the constant and fervent annoyance of my alarm, which I sleep right on through. But then the DM in my head gives me another chance. I wake up at around 8:20, and there's another will save, and I go ahead and roll a natural 20, and right there I am perfectly aware of the situation, the fact that I have a class at 9 o'clock, the fact that I just slept in and almost slept in a bit too long, and I managed to get all my stuff together and get all the way to my class without any consequences. I was not even late, I was early, and everything worked out perfectly. Just another example of how lots and lots of bad stuff can happen in your day. But it only takes one good roll to make sure that everything ends up okay. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this new format of video. Let me know if you liked having 3 segments of it down in the comments below, and also just let me know how your week went. It is very valuable for me to be able to read those comments and interact with you guys, so please don't be shy to put your experiences in there. Anyways, I hope that you guys soar high and enjoy your ride of life. Bye!